Well, hi, I'm Adrian Warnock, and I'm here with Professor Peter Hillmen. This is now the second interview that we filmed together. And to this particular interview, we talked a lot about the background, really, of particularly CLL and how it's sort of developed in terms of treatment and what the journey is like for a patient, from diagnosis to watch and wait to sort of treatment, and also a little bit of where we might go in the future in terms of new treatments and new combinations. So it was a really helpful sort of journey. But I guess there's a bunch of questions that I'm sure many of us have got for a top blood cancer doctor. And I guess with Peter's permission, we'll probably talk more broadly about blood cancer in this particular segment, because I guess we don't know much about the specific different indications. And certainly the government have in the UK labelled all blood cancer patients as being high risk. And some of the data, particularly the way the Blood Cancer UK charity analysed that data, or reported on that data rather, they didn't analyse it, suggests that maybe even blood cancer patients as a group are the highest risk, other than perhaps solid organ transplant donors. So this is causing great anxiety. And I'm thinking a little bit about the sort of patient we were describing, Peter, or you were describing in the first segment, when you talked about someone who, might almost have found out about their blood cancer, either of CLL or another slow-growing cancer, almost by accident, and been told, it's okay, you don't need treatment, go away, work, live your life, go on holiday, you've got a job, you may be married, your wife or husband might be a key worker, a doctor, or in my case, an occupational therapist. You might have kids at school, and you might not have very many symptoms. Maybe you've got a little bit of fatigue we talked about, or maybe you don't really have too much of anything. Maybe you get the odd cold, or maybe, you don't even feel that your immunity is that bad. And then all of a sudden, politicians come on the screen and say, you will not leave your house. You are under lock and key. You are under house arrest. What has that been like for the patients you've spoken to? And how do you feel about that as a blood cancer doctor and trying to help people through that? What advice would you have for us, people?
I think it's been a real challenge for everybody, not just patients. I mean, the lockdown, some people have dealt with it well. The people struggle with the whole isolation. It depends on your social situation as well and your life situation. So some people live near outside space that they can easily go onto. Others are stuck in a much more limited place. So I think that's a problem generally. I think in terms of our patients, if you like, the hematology patients, we know first of all for CLL that the infection is an issue. This is a disease of the immune system. Not every patient with CLL will get infections, but we know there's a higher risk of getting infections if you have CLL, particularly if you've had treatment. I mean, the stage A patients are slightly more difficult to know exactly what the risk is, but somebody who's on treatment or has recently had treatment is clearly at greater risk of any infection. So, and then if you look at the COVID situation, we're starting to get more information specifically about COVID. That there was a very recent paper which showed, with a large number of the population in the UK, that showed that hematological malignancy was an important risk factor for severity of COVID-19 infection. So with 4 times the risk of dying if those individuals got it rather than people without hematological malignancy. So I think it's not in isolation. It supports the data. We know these individuals are at risk of infection. And so to answer the question about the impact on patients, well, I think most patients, not all patients, but most patients are anxious about COVID. I mean, most people are anxious about COVID, and they're anxious about their own situation with the disease and treatment affecting their risk. And in fact, most patients have locked down, some of them even earlier than before the government said they should do so, because it was an obvious risk. And we had the discussions. And so that's been a challenge. The shielding list that came from the government was a bit of a challenge as well, because some people were on it, some people weren't on it.
These aging NHS computers couldn't really do the job, could they? I think that was part of the problem.
I don't think it's even I think it's just that we don't have a list of patients who are vulnerable, and they had to sort of create this list in next to no time, which I think clearly is difficult with millions of people involved. So I think that was a big challenge. And I think now the challenge we're having is coming out of shielding. So, clearly in the population, the prevalence of the virus is going down. Hopefully will continue to go down, but we have the variables of the general population being, the lockdown being relaxed, which we obviously then worry, is there going to be a second, I wouldn't call a second peak, but a return of the first peak, if you like. And then that obviously puts our patients at risk again. So I think there's a lot of anxiety amongst our patients about coming out of shielding and how that can be done. There's some people saying, well, it'll only be safe when there's no virus, so that's going to be a long time off, or other people taking a more possibly rational view that, okay, as it gets less, we can control the risk in a better way. So I think it has created a challenge for the patients. It's also created a challenge for our treatment. So we don't want to bring patients into hospital. We haven't wanted to bring patients into hospital. So our patients have been by phone. Our treatments, if we could, we've delayed to stop them having patients having to come to hospital. We're now starting to for patients where we feel we're very uncomfortable about delaying treatments, that we're starting to retreat, start the treatment again, which I think is important in the safest way as we can, protecting the patients when they come to hospital. But I think it has had a major impact.
Can you talk a little bit about that protecting the patients thing? Because one of the big worries at the moment is everybody doesn't want to go to hospital. And so there are people who probably should be in hospital who are staying at home. And there are people not presenting with conditions to be diagnosed or reluctant to go even when they really should. And you mentioned there that sometimes you do need to treat people and you protect them. What's going on in hospitals? Because I guess it's very different. And many of us have not been in a hospital for months now.
No.
The longest time I've not been one for a while.
I think the impression and probably the reality initially was that the hospitals were dangerous places where the virus was focused. We and almost all hospitals I've heard of in the UK effectively separated the wards and the hospital into places where COVID patients would be and places where COVID patients, which were, if you like, clean of COVID. So certainly in our institution, our oncology wing, which includes hematology, was virtually free of COVID throughout the whole crisis, if you like, so far. Obviously, some of our patients came in with temperatures and may have had COVID, and they were then moved to the COVID ward. So there's been a segregation of people, and actually, as a haematologist, in our centre, we weren't really allowed to go into the COVID areas because for the fear of bringing it back to our patients. So we wouldn't go into an ICU, for example, where obviously a lot of patients were focused. If and obviously we have haematology patients there even before the COVID era, we would go on, there'd be a lot of family members there, a lot of haematologists would go on to see the patients. That's really been stopped to try and stop any risk of cross-contamination. So now when we see patients, we're isolating them as much as possible. So we're distancing if we can, we're using them in single rooms. We're seeing far less patients still. So I said we may have seen 50 or 70 patients in a morning. We're now seeing maybe 15 this week in that same and isolating the patients. But we are thinking very carefully about it and trying to make it as safe as possible for patients. So I think the risk of to a patient coming into a controlled area like ours is very small. I think the risk of going to A&E, with a temperature is probably different.
Yeah, that's a good point. And how would you handle it then, do you think? If let's say someone is shielding, they've been shielding for 10 weeks or more, and they've been really strict about it. Everyone they're living with is strict about it. Or in some cases, people have moved out of their house. They've left their family home in order to live somewhere safer. Yeah. And so they know that they've not been exposed, but maybe they start to get a temperature anyway, and perhaps they've got symptoms that might suggest that they've picked up a bacterial chest infection, because of course you can get that from what's in your own throat. You don't have to catch that from someone else. And they're then very frightened to go into hospital, and people are sort of saying to them, hey, go into hospital. Now, of course, one option is to try and treat early with an antibiotic and keep them at home. But what if it starts to get a bit iffy? How would you talk to somebody in that situation? And how would you try and make sure that you didn't bring them to hospital and then give them COVID on top?
Well, I think there's two issues. I think first of all, that's a dangerous situation that we know some of our patients who are vulnerable will get serious infections anyway, as you said, and managing it at home is not always possible. And in that situation, the hospitals, we have a way of keeping those patients away from COVID. Now, I think what's the second part of your question was, what's the risk of us giving someone COVID in the hospital? I think that is very small now in that controlled way, because we know we test patients. Anyone admitted to a hospital is now tested for COVID. We're getting close to having antibody tests and more testing generally, and we are segregating patients. If they are positive now, you can never say for certain that someone's clear of COVID, and so the safest place to be is sitting in a room by yourself and not seeing anyone else. But that is the safest from COVID, but not the safest from other health issues. And so we have to break down the shielding at some point. And
especially if someone's ill like that. And I guess they would probably, if possible, be admitted to a side room or something, or somewhere where they wouldn't be exposed to other people, and they would try and shield them in the hospital, I guess. But
I think generally across the board, not just CLL, not just hematology, there are going to be patients who die because they are not prepared to come into hospital with heart attacks or strokes or other things because they're scared of COVID. So there's a balance that has to be met, arrived at to get it proportionate, really. So so it's very important that to contact your specialist team, and that they know they can assess the risk of coming in or not coming in.
Yeah, and compare that to this other risk. I guess one of the problems with the whole COVID thing all the way through, though, is we don't really know what that risk is. So, you hear, for example, figures like, it's 1% that will die. And then you say, well, actually, no, that probably is too high for the general population, but maybe that's too low for people with blood cancer. You mentioned sort of 2 or 3 times, but then the rate also goes up when you're old. It also maybe goes up if you're a little bit fat. And then to actually get a handle on how much of a risk you are at, first of all, if you catch it, but second of all, how much risk there is in you catching it. I mean, if you meet one person, I heard recently that they think it's about 1 in 250 or 1 in 500 people or something now have it in the UK. So if you meet one person, it's perhaps not very likely that you'll catch it, especially if you're social distance. But if you meet 10 people, 20 people, I mean, how do you weigh all that up? And how do you help your patients, to actually evaluate risk? Because I think it's been a bit sort of just broad stroke at the moment, and so therefore there's this kind of very fearful, stay at home was the right message in many ways, and it still is in some ways for us. I mean, we're still shielding, and no one's saying we shouldn't, but to actually be able to weigh up the risk and say, okay, yes, I understand I need to stay home, but I've also got this problem, so now I need to go to hospital, and that's more important. I mean, that's difficult.
Yeah, I think from a general shielding point of view or isolating perspective, I mean, there are certain environments where the risk of contracting the virus is much lower. So outside with social distancing, it's far less, with short interactions with people rather than spending a long time with them. Being stuck on the tube, not distancing is obviously very different to going for a walk in the Dales and not seeing anyone. And so I think our patients have to take some responsibility for that. They know that you've got the risk of it getting infected is really based on several things, isn't it? It's how many people are in the community with the virus. So what's the chance of coming across somebody, and are you going to be exposed to the patient? Are you going to expose them? Are you going to be close to them? Are you going to be able to socially distance from them? So I think my view is that I want to know what's going on in the population. So the changes in distancing will have an impact on the prevalence of the virus. If the prevalence of the virus is going down, then I'm happy for my patients to start, going out and doing a little bit more with the distancing, and then you want to be a little bit ahead of the curve, so that you want to know what's happening in the population before you actually, the next thing is going to be Can you go and sit in a pub, in a garden of a pub, and when they open up and things like that? So I think it's to be a gradual release over time as the virus goes down.
So you see, the thing is, a lot of us were expecting it to finish on the 15th of June, as though it was going to be a hard date. Yeah. And then there's been talk about, it's the end of June. And then I think there's been a lot of talk about, actually, it may well be longer than that. What's your kind of gut feeling? It sounds like you're saying you don't expect shielding to stop overnight. You think perhaps, like this idea. I mean, for me, for example, I didn't go out for 10 weeks plus, more than that, actually. And then they suddenly said it was okay to go for a walk. But I didn't feel terribly comfortable going out in the afternoon into a busy park. So what did we do? We got up early. We went before most people were up. A lot of kids, particularly young people, will be in bed. So even my sister actually was still in bed at the time we went out. And we didn't go at 6 a.m. like I've heard some people do. But we went out, first thing in the morning when people were not around. We found a place that we knew had wide footpaths, wide open spaces, not many people there, social distancing. But I have to say, it was quite worrying. I think maybe people aren't emphasising enough the sort of impact it has on someone to be isolated for 12 weeks essentially through fear, and then to build that fear and to almost become agoraphobic, actually. And so to actually gradually ease yourself in is probably going to be better anyway, just psychologically, let alone from the risk. Have you had any thoughts about that? Is that something you've had many conversations with your patients about? Or
well, I'm an optimist. Okay, so I think this virus will reduce in prevalence and eventually, will disappear when we get vaccines and things. That could be some time. But what we have now, which we didn't have 2 months ago, is a much better feel for how much virus is around and where is it. And so as we get the track and tracing and all the testing and when that really kicks in, we'll be able to isolate the virus rather than isolate the people, if you like. And I think that's where we're going to be moving over the next month or two. If you look at other countries, Spain, Italy, France, China, those other countries who are ahead of the curve for us, that the incidence, the prevalence of the virus has gone right down, and the deaths have gone right down, and there doesn't seem to be a second spike. For example, China, although we don't know about the data, the quality of the data. So I think that it's around, as you said, slowly, but with the knowledge of what's going on in the community, going out and when it's safe, doing things that, as long as you're distant and you do the hand washing and you do all those other precautions, then you're not going to catch the virus on a walk where you don't meet anybody if you don't sit down and touch anything. And so, and you're right. There's a sort of, it's not healthy to be isolated inside for months and months and months. You've got to, we're not designed to do that, are we? So I think it's a matter of doing it logically.
So, I mean, I was talking to 2 different patients who, over the weekend just gone, were told by their teams, I think trying to be helpful, but maybe not really being that helpful, that they would have to socially isolate and shield for 2 years. I don't know where this figure of 2 years came from, whether it's some kind of modelling or some kind of theory, but I mean, that was quite devastating for those people concerned and for everyone else on the forum, because we were all going, well, is there something special about you? And there really wasn't. I think they were post-treatment, so maybe that might make them a little bit special, but there's lots of people post-treatment. So, I mean, what's your sense of the timings on this? Do you think, I mean, are you an optimist for the vaccine, for example? I mean, they did say that there are tens of millions of doses of the Oxford vaccine being made ready right now, and if it does show to be working, that they would give it in September and maybe even prioritise the shield, as they said. So what do you think about that?
First of all, I think that the virus in the community will go down before the vaccine has any real impact, even if it's available in September. So I think the risk of it contracting the virus will be far less. I mean, so I think we need to the vaccine is an important way to protect the population, not an individual, as I would see it at the moment. Obviously, it does protect the individual, but I think that the virus will be in a much lower frequency before the vaccine is available. The vaccine will hopefully prevent second pandemics, which is next year whenever they come back, and that's very important. in terms of the vaccines, certainly one of the Oxford vaccines is a live vaccine. So we have to make sure that the vaccines that are appropriate for our patients, first of all, and secondly, we know our patients don't necessarily respond to vaccines as well as someone who doesn't have an immune problem. So more important than that, I mean, if you have a vaccination as a patient with a dead vaccine and you respond, that's great. But the real value of the vaccine is driving it out of the herd, if you like, to use the old jargon, and not have it around for everybody else to catch.
So, but what if we've got this situation where there's still a bit of virus around, and there is a vaccine, and I think it's a bit debatable about this Oxford vaccine, isn't it? Because it's sort of chimpanzee cold virus, essentially, that apparently can't cause disease in humans, but then they put the mRNA in it. So whether that is going to be a problem for us to take or not is a bit unclear, but you might well be right that it might not work for us. So what happens then if you're a patient and maybe you're quite low in your immunoglobulin levels, but up until this point you haven't qualified for IVIG or anything like that? Do you see a time when IVIG might protect against COVID, and obviously not too soon? But
I think the reality is that the virus will be driven out of the population, and therefore will not cause a problem for our patients in the medium to long term. 2 years, I think, is that was a very pessimistic view of how long people are going to shield for. And,
well, that's really good. So can we hold you to that, Peter? That that we'll be home for Christmas or something. I don't know.
So not too good, but I think it's a matter of patients being informed and making the right decisions and sensible decisions. I mean, so I enjoy playing golf. I want to play golf. I can distance myself. I'm not going to get infection doing that. So that's I can make a judgment as to what the risk of me doing something and the benefit to me personally of doing it are. And I think it's really important that individual patients do that and don't take unnecessary risks. And each individual will have to assess what's an unnecessary risk for them. But so I think my being an optimist, I think for the next weeks and maybe 2 or 3 months, we're going to have the virus is going to drop down over time, and the risk is going to get less, and then we're going to start relaxing the shielding, in that sort of timescale.
Sure. And I guess then one of the interesting outcomes for all of this for some of us will be that perhaps we'll be a little bit more conscious about our risk in general. And so, like, for example, the flu season, I've talked to some patients who won't go on the London Underground during the winter, but they might be happy going on it in the summer. And that's a sort of individual risk assessment that they used to make because of things like flu and concerns about flu, which, again, vast majority of patients will be okay with flu, but some might get into trouble or have a long illness with it. And so do you think that there'll be perhaps a bit more awareness about infection and the need for vaccinating in more general terms for some people with blood cancers and just about how to try and make sure that as people's immunity gets worse, because there is a whole group of people who are suffering regular infections at the moment but can't get IVIG because of rationing, maybe they're given antibiotics, maybe they're not, and that can be a bit debatable. Some of them are told, yes, you ought to use your own towels and wash your hands more carefully. Others are told just live your life normally. And I'm not suggesting that we all create a bubble for ourselves, but do you think there are some things that even moving forwards, people with CLL and other blood cancers will do differently, perhaps?
I think it'll vary between individuals, but I think we have to remember that, we want to have as normal a life as possible.
Yes.
And, we don't want our patients' lives to be defined by the fact they're suffering from CLL. They want to have be able to do what they want. I mean, the big things for our patients are meeting the grandchildren, meeting same for everybody.
Hey, some of us don't have grandchildren yet, Peter. Come on. Remember, there are some of us who've still got our children at home. Yeah, you
might want to meet them.
I would like to meet them actually at the moment. Yeah,
I've not seen my eldest son since January, so that's affects my quality of life. So I think we have to get it in perspective and as we know, as the disease is coming under control in the population, make the right decisions for individual patients.
So I think what you're saying to me in general from both of these interviews, and I guess I should probably let you go because I know you're a really busy man, is that you are an optimist, that you believe that the future's bright for people with certainly CLL, and I guess there's a similar story in some other blood cancers where, you know, treatments are coming on board that actually prolong life, in some cases cure, and certainly we can expect much longer lives than perhaps people in previous generations with the same condition would have had. Obviously, there's some variation in terms of how aggressive cancer can be and when exactly you need treatment. But actually, you know, we should look forward to a time of even more advance in treatment, but also a time when, you know, this COVID will eventually get out of the way and we can get back to sort of trying to live a bit more of a normal life, maybe with some thoughts about infection. And I guess that's an area we will need to address in some people especially. But to try and make sure, as you say, that it's about quality of life and living. I mean, because it's not much of a life, Peter, to be stuck up, cooped up in a house for month after month and not able to do anything. So we've got to find a way to get people out. And there are some things that I wish people do. So, for example, what about antibody screening? So, you know, there's been a lot of anxiety where people have desperately tried to shield themselves away from family members who got COVID and maybe even thought they might have got it themselves. So that anxiety might potentially go if you were to test the family and or the patient and say, oh, actually, there are antibodies here. At least, you know, I know that might not 100% protect, but, you know, wouldn't it be nice? And yet, when it came to the rollout of the antigen testing, I'm afraid shielded patients weren't prioritised. And I'd kind of like to see that change. I don't know if it will or if you've got any influence on that.
Well, I mean, the antibody tests are important, but you know, we have to understand once we get a test that works, and there are you know, relatively very inexpensive tests coming along for antibodies. Yeah. We need to understand how protective they are, and that's we're in a very we're learning a lot about this as we go along. So I'm optimistic that this will be a blip that we'll get, that hopefully most of us will get through. I mean, obviously it's a big problem for many individuals, and I'm not underplaying it. But you know, I think in 6 months, a year's time, we'll know a lot more, and we'll be through this bubble, and hopefully we can get back onto more normal lives. I mean, I think that's what we should be aiming for.
I think that's what everyone should be aiming for, and that's probably a great place to stop. And thank you very much, Peter, for all you've done over decades. I never actually asked you how long, but over decades of helping to drive forward the science in this, and doing so in a compassionate way. And I hope that people who've been watching have learned something, but also caught something of your heart and your passion for this area, and just your optimism. I mean, I think that's a wonderful thing to have, because and it's difficult because we don't want someone who's unreal, but we also don't want to be kind of fed a very negative story. I mean, it's hard to get that balance right for a patient's point of view, but thank you for what you do. Really appreciate it.
Nice to meet you. Okay.
All right, all the best. Thanks a lot, Peter.
Okay.
Bye-bye.